Three, two, and one. All right. Hello. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me um, and to listen to my version, my story, my defense, if you will, about what transpired some 30 plus years ago with regards to HIV. Okay. I did this a couple of years ago on Facebook. I think it was back during the pandemic, somewhere around in there. And Facebook went through these changes where they went through and they were deleting your videos. I had a couple of videos on Facebook and they're all gone now. And so I'm redoing this just because I'd like, in the event that I don't make it through this, I just like to make sure that I kind of have like a digital footprint, if you will, that more or less documents my version. In the United States, as a United States citizen, you're supposed to be afforded certain rights. One of them is due process of law, um, where if you're suspected of having committed a crime, you are formally charged with a crime and you are afforded the opportunity to defend yourself. This circus has been going on 10, 11, 12, 13 years. And really, the only platform that I have available to me to quote unquote defend myself or to respond to the gargantuous size amounts of allegations that have been hurled at me and to the court of public opinion for all of these years now is really social media. That's really the only platform or communication vehicle, if you will, that I have available in with regards to being able to defend myself and or respond to some of the allegations. It's gone on for so many years. Some people may wonder why even bother doing it. Well, just because to me, I've been treated so unfairly through all of this that it kind of means a lot to me. It does. It means a lot if you're being charged, if lies are being circulated about you and you're not being afforded the opportunity to address them and it's being done within the court of public opinion. It would be one thing if, let's just say, that a bunch of prosecutors were investigating me and thought, maybe I had committed a crime, for them to have beef with me one on one. But when you engage a whole entire community to come against me, and you frame me in a very not so positive light, this is really, again, the only communication vehicle that I have available to me. So that's why I'm doing this. So thank you for, again, just being open minded and taking the time to actually listen, because I always remember there's two sides to every story. Well, three sides. There's the accuser sides, there's the accused side, and then somewhere in between those two is the happy medium, which is the truth. And that's not saying that I am this perfect individual that hasn't done anything wrong as it pertains to what has transpired. I acknowledged many years ago that after I actually sat down and listened to what was being said, I not acquiesced, but I agreed and said, okay, I can see that. But once you put my actions up against the actions of some of the other individuals involved in this and what they did, you don't get an apples to apples comparison, not by any stretch of the imagination. But at any rate, travel back in time with me to 1993. Okay, so I've already acknowledged the molestation that I went through as a child. That itself did not involve any intercourse. So I always considered myself to be a virgin due to that, because technically you are a virgin if it doesn't actually involve penetration. Okay, so I had my very first boyfriend at the age of 17. I think I was a junior in high school. It was my intent to wait until I was married because, again, I attended Catholic school and I was a very religious child growing up, taught right from wrong, and I knew it was wrong. And at that stage, and I didn't want anything to do with it. And just due to peer pressure and him pressuring me to do it around the clock for about a year, I finally caved and did do it. I was 18 at the time. Um, I was 18 at the time that I lost my virginity. So he and I dated about a year and a half. And I graduated high school, went off to college. Long story short, and again, he was my very first sexual experience. Up until that point, there had been no heavy petting, no bumping uglies, no oral sex, none of that with anybody else. He was, he was my very first sexual experience. Okay. So, um, after he and I broke up, it was my freshman, it had to have been about winter quarter, 1993. Um, he and I broke up just because of allegations of cheating. He was in one city and I was in another city, and I didn't feel like I could trust him. And our relationship was strained too, just because he was in another city and I was away at college. So, anyway, so I started, and I wouldn't even consider this dating. I don't even know what you call it. I still don't have words for it. But I met another guy. This was my second sexual partner at this point in time. He and I did have sex 2 times. I believe one was with protection and one was without. Um, I know that I still couldn't quite figure out what I was doing or how I got involved in that whole thing, but I ended it rather quickly. It only lasted a couple months. And I remember, and so someone, if you've had multiple sexual partners, and it can be kind of difficult to be able to go back and look at your list and say, okay, well, who infected me, who gave me what. And I remember this because I had never been sick like a day in my life. I was always a very healthy child. And like maybe a week or two after the sexual experience with having unprotected sex with him, I remember I became the sickest I had ever been in my life. Now, mind you, I'd only had one other sexual partner, and that was my boyfriend from high school. I, again, never any problems or issues whatsoever, ever after having sex with him. And with this individual, like I said, a week or two, I don't remember the specifics in terms of how long, but I just became sick, like just sick. Like I had never been sick like that. Like, and that's because I was infected during my second sexual experience. During experience with my second sexual partner. So it wasn't like I had been this wild, whole, promiscuous person, up until that point. That had been my second sexual partner. Okay. Now, mind you, I'd never had any type of the talk, no sexual education. They don't teach that in Catholic school. So if you don't get it in school, and I'm so glad it is taught in school now, but if you don't get it in school, it's kind of up to, maybe your parents, or maybe you attend a workshop, or there's some other way for you to become informed and educated about just the responsibilities of if you decide that you want to have an active sexual life. And for me, I never had any of that. So an STD could have walked up to me and slapped me in the face multiple times, which it did, and I wouldn't have any clue, none whatsoever, what was actually going on. And that's sad. That's scary. But not to digress. So I became very sick, very ill, with almost like the flu on crack. And it lasted maybe about 2 weeks, just very sick. That first week I was so sick I couldn't even go to class. And I think I eventually dragged myself to the ER, and they gave me these big, huge antibiotics to take. It was just diagnosed as something viral. And unbeknownst to me, I had been infected with HIV. That's what it was. When the virus enters your body, and each person's body is different. But when the virus enters the body, and you'll find this is very common. This is what a lot of people say. I became sick. I had like this flu or cold on crack that was just horrible. I, it lasted a week or two, and then I was fine, kind of okay again, but I was never really the same again after that, after the virus enters the body, because at that point in time, that's when the virus begins to set up shop and starts to do its damage. And that's called the acute phase. Okay. And so, the after the initial infection, I got better. I was after taking the antibiotics, but like a couple of weeks later, and one of the hallmarks of that illness that I had was like this very, very extremely sore and sensitive throat. And I had like a really bad infection in my throat. It wasn't strep throat, and they ran all the tests and they didn't know what to call it. So my dad had always told me, and I still do this to this day. He was like, okay, Shelly, well, whenever you get sick and a doctor prescribes antibiotics, never take any of the antibiotics. Always save a couple. So that way, if you get sick again, you'll have a couple of antibiotics to take, to kind of help you until you can get in to see a doctor again. And I still do that to this day. And that's what I did. I didn't take all the antibiotics because I told him I was sick, and he was one of the ones that urged me to go to the emergency room. And the only thing that really came back was the sore throat. And I was like, God, what is this? And so I popped a couple of the antibiotics over the course of a couple of days, and it went away again. By then, I kind of made my way through the end of spring semester. And I went to Chicago to live with my dad to do an internship for McDonald's Corporation in their marketing department. And I'm still in the acute phase. So what the acute phase means is that you're going to have different things happening to your body, and it just comes out of nowhere. You could have like night sweats, you could have headaches, you could have fevers, you can have sore throats, body aches, night sweats. There's like a whole laundry list. And I would have a couple of them off and on. But the one hallmark thing for me that kept returning was this sore throat. And I was like, why do I keep having this sore throat? And it would be very painful. And then I started feeling like extremely fatigued. And I'm having all these things happening to me. And I'm in Chicago doing an internship during my summer break. And, I'm telling my dad, like what's going on with me. And of course, he had no clue either what was going on. But I was, in the active acute phase. And I think he, at that point in time, he was like, okay, well, you probably just have another cold coming on. Let's go to CVS or Walgreens or whatever and get you some flu medicine, some cold medicine. So then we tried that, and it went away for a little bit. And then a couple of weeks later, it came right back. So I'm constantly having to deal with, this new life of, or this new infiltration, if you will, of just a variety of medical issues. None very serious, none that like stopped me from being able to go to work, or were particularly troublesome. They were just there out of the blue all of a sudden, and I couldn't figure them out because, again, I'd never had any of these before. And again, the only reason that I could isolate and identify it down to him, Anthony Nelson, is because, again, I'd never had any of these problems or issues with my first boyfriend. And it wasn't until after the sexual experience with Anthony Nelson, again, almost down to an exact science, like within a week or 2 weeks, is when I just started, all this stuff just started coming out of the woodworks, and I couldn't figure out, what the source of it was. So I went on like this, went back to school, start my sophomore year, and it continued. But the sore throat continued. I would get headaches. I would be extremely tired and fatigued, where I only wanted to sleep all the time. And again, I'm not thinking STD. I'm not thinking HIV. Nobody immediately starts thinking that, especially if you're just completely green and you have absolutely no knowledge whatsoever about STDs or, let alone HIV of all things. And so I'm just going about my normal college life, going to classes. I think I picked up like a little part. I had a work study job on campus, and I'm just trying to make it through each class because I'm just so tired and fatigued, and I had this sore throat that kept popping up. So what I did was, we had a student medical center on campus. So I remember I went there a couple times for some of those same issues that I just shared with you that I was having, just trying to figure out, what's going on. I was just perfectly healthy, never been to the doctor before for anything out of a cold before, individual, and now it is, I can barely keep my eyes open because I'm so tired and fatigued and I keep having this sore throat. And so they gave me the infamous pink pills. And so what the pink pills were, I'm not sure if it was an antibiotic or whatever, but it was just the go-to for college students at the college that I attended at that point in time, that if you were sick or not feeling better, you would go and get the pink pills and take it a couple days and you would feel better. Well, the pink pills never really worked for me after trying them a couple different times. And so eventually I just stopped going. And I just kind of was like, okay, well, I guess that's just kind of the way I am. That's just kind of the way life is now. And I just learned how to deal with it. I was like, well, I just know I just need to take a lot of naps. And if I have a sore throat coming, just carry cough drops on you at all times. And, mainly just make sure you get a lot of rest. And that kind of was, kind of became my life. It's like I just wanted to sleep all the time and rest all the time. And now, right about this time, I think the internet, it was AOL, the internet started to become available, or maybe you could even use the internet on campus. I forgot, it's 30 plus years ago. But I remember I did a search for like sore throat or something, maybe, let me see, we're talking like my sophomore year. So it would have been like 95, 96. That's when I would have started, like, and the internet became available and everybody would go to the internet for everything to try to, search and Google and get answers to stuff. And so I think maybe one time I typed in like chronic sore throat or something, or, something like that. I don't even remember what the initial search would have been for. Just trying to figure out, like, okay, is there something I'm missing? Is there another way I could be treating this sore throat or what? And so I would get, different things to try, and I would do that. And over the course of like maybe my whole sophomore year, because, and I'm trying to remember it to like to the nth degree, because again, this was 34, 35 years ago. And I just remember, I know for a fact that it would not have been a search for HIV. It would have been a search for like some of those symptoms that I was having. And I do specifically remember at one point during, while I'm doing all of this, I think what happened was maybe HIV appeared. And I remember, because I remember like going through the list of, this is what maybe you could have if this is the reason why you keep having these problems or issues. And I remember going through the list and looking and like, thinking like, HIV? Why? No. I've had 2 sexual partners up until that point. Never been, I and I always consider HIV to be like a like a homosexual, because back, we were talking about like 90, 95, 96. And that's when, heterosexual people really weren't being diagnosed with HIV. It was known as being as like a gay person's disease. So I remember looking at it saying, with a little bit of knowledge that I did have about it, saying, no, that couldn't possibly be me. I'm not a hetero, and I'm not a homosexual male. I've never had a blood transfusion because that's when the whole Ryan Wright thing with you can get it through a blood transfusion or needles. And I was like, I've never done needles, intravenous drugs intravenously. So just through the process of like deduction, I'm like, there's just no way this could be it. So, and I don't think it was like a denial thing. It was just, how could this be possible? I haven't been like a hoe. I haven't been promiscuous. I've had two sexual partners up until this point. And so I just kind of blew it off, like, no, that couldn't possibly be it. I mean, come on. So I just went on about my life. And, as the time went by, I would, because I'm still in the acute phase usually lasts anywhere from the point where you're first infected up until like 3 or 4, 5 years or something like that. So I'm just kind of going through life, dealing with the different little symptoms that I would have. And there weren't a lot because, again, I was never sick, like sickly ill to be admitted to the hospital or needing surgeries or, it was just so obvious that when I would go to the doctor that's what was wrong with me. Like something is seriously, it was never anything like that. It was just the fatigue, the occasional sore throats. And really that was about it. And I remember, as time would go on, because it wasn't making a whole lot of sense. I would clear the whole entire cold and medicine aisle. I would have like a cough or have like a cold that would feel like it would last a couple of weeks. But I'm still keeping up with my classes. I'm doing, doing good in classes. I have my work study job. I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing. And it never really negatively affected my life to the point that, I would be in bed for weeks. I was still, getting up, being a go-getter. So that went on for like a couple of years. And by the time I want to say that, and that became my norm, it became my norm to have a sore throat, to have a headache, to have a cough, to have symptoms of a cold off and on. And I just kind of figured, okay, well, that's just the way I am. Never did it occur to me that I needed to go and get tested for STDs or for HIV. It never occurred to me because of that whole, that misconception that, in order to acquire an STD, you have to be a hoe, you have to have a multitude of sexual partners to have HIV. You just had to have been like a porn star or, something like that. I'm walking around with all these preconceived notions about what someone would look like that would acquire these. And clearly, when I looked, when I considered, okay, is this something that is plausible for me? It would always be a resounding no, because it just didn't make sense. Okay. So I'm in college, 96, 97. And, I've dated off and on. I've probably dated maybe 3 or 4 guys at the most. And a couple of them were like relationships that lasted like, a year and a half. A couple of them were just, long enough for me to say, okay, this isn't the one for me, a couple of months or whatever. But, probably a total of maybe 4 guys that I dated. Two, I want to say 2 at least were boyfriends, and this was in college. So, and we did have, a sexual relationship. I'm not going to go into the trauma parts because that's not the whole purpose of this. But yeah, so my senior year in high school, I'm still just kind of cruising by. I'm getting ready to graduate. And This was also when I started dealing with depression. And I didn't know what was that's what it was, because back then it was, Black people, mental health and wellness was not really a topic of discussion. It was very taboo to talk about. And so I walked around undiagnosed for a number of years, not knowing that that's what was going on with me. And I remember I would just sit in my dorm room and cry, or, when I moved off campus and I had my BFF, which was my roommate, um, I was just being sad and, melancholy, not really wanting to do anything. It was depression, and I didn't know that's what it was. So anyway, I started dating a guy. This was my son's father, my oldest son's father, and I remember um, becoming pregnant. It was my senior year of college, and he proposed. We were engaged. All of that good stuff. I was terrified to tell my family. I think I was like 6 months pregnant by the time that I told them, because I was just so terrified and petrified about what they were going to say, because I was always the good girl. I was the overachiever. And everybody was just kind of shocked, I guess, maybe to just think that I was even having sex to begin with, and then let alone to be pregnant. But the general consensus was that it was okay, because I was going to be graduating in a few months. And they were like, okay, well, you guys just, get engaged, have the baby, get married. You guys can go to the courthouse, get, however you guys want to do it. And they just kind of put the ball back in our court. So, needless to say, I went through all of my little prenatal workups and things like that. And I'm trying to remember if during my pregnancy, if I was having any symptoms. And I just remember, I'm pretty sure that I was not tested for HIV when I was pregnant with my oldest son. Um, I think I do recall reading some literacy on it, that they would have like given me at the hospital. And I just remember it kind of like being on like for like a millisecond on the back of my mind saying, could I be positive? Um, and I'm like, oh, surely I'm not, because if I was positive, I would be sickly. And each time they did labs on me, they would, my lab work would be messed up, and it would be kind of obvious that that's what's going on. And so I'm like, okay, now, just get it out the back of your mind, because it didn't make any sense to me. It made like no sense at all to me that I could have been positive. And I went through the pregnancy, had Aaron, my oldest son, and he had his father, Aaron's father, and I stayed together maybe another year. I think Aaron was about a year old when that relationship ended, and I ended up walking away from it for a couple of different reasons. And I remember, I was still living in Macon. I went and got my own apartment as a townhome, and I was working for Progressive Insurance at the time. And I remember I kept, it was just nagging. I kept having a sore throat. I think by then I was starting to have like headaches too. And I remember I saw it was like a billboard or something, or a magazine article. It was something that prompted me, that had like everything all together. Like, are you experiencing these symptoms? And if so, consider getting tested for HIV, because I think by back then, that's when like AZT and all the medications had came out that like greatly extended your life and, like improve your overall quality of life. And I remember, just seeing that and thinking it probably took like another month or two by the time that I got up the nerve to go and get tested. But they pointed to, and this is how green I was, how very little I knew. I could have gone to my primary care doctor and got tested, but I ended up going to the Macon Health Department, because that's kind of where they directed you to. Like, come on in, we can get you tested, and you'll know your results. Back then, it took about 2 weeks for the results to come back. Talk about a nervous wreck. I was a complete nervous wreck going to get tested because, here I am, this overachiever, never done anything wrong, graduated the top of my class, possibly infected with HIV. I'm like, come on, somebody please make it make sense. So anyway, I go into the health department. They asked me for all of my information, which I gave them. Gave them my license. It had like my name, my address where I lived at, and they asked for like the phone number. They asked for everything. And they were like, okay. They came and took the blood, and they were like, okay, so it'll be about 2 weeks before this comes back. And what'll happen is you just come back in, and we'll give you the results. Well, during that 2 week period of time, I was just a complete nervous wreck. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I'm like, oh my God, what if I've made like the ultimate mistake and acquired HIV? And I'm starting to think about if I did have it, where it could have came from. And, I'm thinking, if I am, how am I going to handle this? Am I going to confront that person? And am I going to tell them? Am I going to tell them that they need to get, because I think back then the way it worked was the health department, if you were positive, either the health department took the information and would contact your sexual partners, or they encourage you yourself to reach out to your sexual partners and inform them. I think that's the way it worked. But because my nerves were bad for that entire 2 week period of time, I'm just thinking the worst case scenario. I'm like, oh my God, what if I'm positive? My life is just over. And I did not go back during that 2 week period of time and get the results because I couldn't, it's like I couldn't handle it. And I didn't tell anybody that I was going to get tested. This was all just completely done confidential, with confidences, full and confidences intact. So one of the things that I learned when I went to go get tested initially was that you have two routes that you can take with regards to getting a test. One is you can give all of your information so that they know exactly who you are, or you can do one where you don't provide any of your information. You just tell them, hey, I'm here to get tested. And they'll say, okay, do you want to give us your information? Or do you not want to, but you still want to get tested? So when you do that, they'll take the blood sample, they'll test it, and they'll give you just this number on a sheet of paper. And what happens is they do it confidential, with full confidentiality intact. They'll test it, they'll send the sample back to the health department, and then you'll go in with your number, and that's the only way that they have the ability to identify you. And you go in with your number on the sheet of paper, and then they'll give you your test results. So because I was such a mess with how am I going to do this, and I'm doing all of this confidential, without telling anybody, because I was so embarrassed about it. I couldn't even believe that it was a possibility. And I was just so afraid that I was going to be shunned from my family, because here it was, I'd always been this overachiever. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes better sense. I can't have this associated with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go back for that initial test result. What I'll do is I'll go back in and get tested, and pursue the confidential route so that they don't have any of my information. So that was just my thought process was, I can do this, and I can go back and do this by myself if they don't have all my information. And I just kind of felt like that particular illness wasn't going to be attached to my name, if that makes sense. But the main thing was I was just so scared and petrified to go back and do it myself. So another couple months went by, and I got up the nerve, and I went back to the health department. And the second time I was tested, Um, I did it confidential so that none of my information was provided. They took the blood sample again, 2 weeks for it to come back, and they just gave me like, and I forgot how long the number was, but they assigned me a number and told me, okay, well, when you come back in 2 weeks, give us this number and we'll be able to pull your results. Okay, so 2 weeks time is up. And I remember I had Aaron. He had to have been like about a little bit more than 1 years old. And I go back to the health department, just shaking in my boots. I mean, I'm so just anxiety has just taken over my body to the point where I don't even know how I was able to walk into the building. But somehow I made it into the building, and I went to the little reception area where you tell them what you're there for. And I told them that I was there to get my test results, and I told them what type of test it was for, and they asked me for the number. I had the little piece of paper that they'd given me with the number on it, so I presented that to the lady that was assisting me, and she was like, okay, just a few minutes, I'll get someone to help you. So I went and sat down with Aaron in the little reception area. And I just remember I felt like this lady, this nurse that was going to come, read the results to me. It seemed like she was taking forever. Like I was there. It felt like I had been there all day because I'm just sitting there shaking in my boots. Like, oh my, I'm just anxiety has its hold on me, and it's having its way. So when she came to the reception area to get me, she was like, calm down, calm down. We're going to get to this bottom, to get to the bottom of this and find out exactly what's going on. And, you're doing the right thing. So she takes me and Aaron into this little side room, and she has the envelope with her. So I remember she's sitting at a desk, like right here, looking forward with the test results in her hand. And I'm sitting off to the side. Aaron is in like his little car seat, little carry-all thing. And I remember she opened it up, looked at it, and she was like, okay. And I'm sitting there holding my breath. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's getting ready to tell me I'm positive my life is over. And she turned to me and she said, okay, Miss White, your results are negative. And I just remember this exhale of relief, the likes of which I don't think anybody can truly feel me on when this woman told me this. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm to the point where I'm okay. I can accept it if I am, and I'll just do what I need to do to get through it. So I'm like thinking worst case scenario, like she's going to tell me I'm positive and my life is over. And so when she says you're negative, I'm like, huh? What? Relieved. Like never before, but still thinking, but there's all this weird stuff going on with me. How could so I was like, can I see? Oh, she was like, here, you get the results. Here's the results. She gave me the results. It said negative, the Western blot, whatever number that was, test that they ran on me, negative. And I remember all that because of how long I inspected and how long I, kept the results, because I just needed to feel confident that I was, in fact, negative despite all of this funky stuff that had been going on with me. So I'm sitting there having a conversation with her, and she was like, okay. Now, mind you, she's just listening to me at this point, and I'm like, but, I've been having all of this really odd stuff going on with me that some of it like really lined up with being HIV positive, like some of the symptoms of it. And she was like, okay, well, like what types of symptoms? And so I started explaining the symptoms to her, and she was like, okay. She was like, yeah, so we would recommend you get tested if you were having symptoms like that. And I was like, she was like, but I have your test results right here and they're negative. And I'm like, okay. But then this was also happening. I have these headaches. I was sweating while I'm sleeping at night. okay. And it was like I was wanting to argue with her that I was in fact positive, even though the test results said negative. And so I'm sitting there for a couple of minutes, having the, just going back and forth with her to the point where she finally said, "Miss White, I don't know what's wrong with it." And I quote verbatim, "I don't know what's wrong with you, but one thing that you can take off the plate is HIV." She said, "Because I have the test results right here in my hand and it says negative. So that is not anything, you do not have to worry about having it because the tests don't lie." She said, "If you were positive, it would be positive." Now, and she like asked me like specifics so that she could try to drill down to see like, "Well, have you been sexually active?" I was like, "No, I haven't had sex in 6, 7, 8, 9, however long it had been." Um, okay. And then she looked at the period of time of which I was tested, and she was like, "Okay, so you don't necessarily need to come back and get retested again. But if you're going to be sexually active going, into the future, you can always come back and get tested again." But she never said come back, because I think now they may say get tested based upon like your last sexual experience, or every 6 months, get tested twice every year if you're sexually active or whatever. She never said any of that to me, as I recall. And I remember the sigh of relief that I had leaving up out of there. And I'm like, "Okay, good, Shell. You just overreacted. You now know for sure that you are not positive." On top of that, remember, and now a couple of months had probably elapsed since I went and took that first initial test. Okay. So, because they had all of my information, I was not there to mislead. I was there to get to the bottom of the matter and to find out what was actually, if I was positive or not. And because of that, I gave them all of my complete information, my address, my work number, my phone number. They had everything. So I'm pretty sure if that test had been positive, somebody from the health department, and I didn't go back and get my test results, I'm pretty sure somebody from the health department would have been calling me, would have been looking for me, would have been showing up at my house saying, "Miss White, you tested positive. You need to come in and start treatment," or whatever. None of that ever happened. Okay. Thank God. And then when I went in and took the second test, I'm like, "Okay, this is it. I'm not positive. Thank God." And so I just kind of went back to living life as normal. I made plans to move out of Macon and move to Atlanta, which I did in 2000. I moved to Atlanta and just continued. I had my test results in my glove compartment of my 1996 Toyota Tercel that I kept in there just as a reminder, that you don't have this. We're not sure exactly what's going on, but that's not it. Okay. And I just kind of figured that it was just something kind of quirky going on with me. And that was that. So as time continued to go on, now remind you, I was infected in 94. This is 2000 when I moved to Atlanta, and like 1998, 1999 when I had those tests done. I'm still having just intermittent, the same type of strange little symptoms. Except for this time, I would notice I've always been very into health and fitness. And so I remember when I moved to Atlanta in 2000, I joined the gym. I joined Gold's Gym. And I remember I'd be in there lifting weights and working out, doing classes and stuff like that. And I would notice like after like a workout, I would have like all these little purple spots all over my body. But it was always like after working out, or if I bumped into something, and I'd be like, "Well, what is this now?" And Now, mind you, some people may be like, well, why did you just go to a doctor and get like a full workup or whatever, which is probably something that I should have done. But remember, at that point in time, I'm a single mom. I'm working full time, probably 55 hours a week. I'm single parenting my son. I don't have any help. Nobody's helping me with anything. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to, I didn't make it a priority, which is, in retrospect, probably something that I could have done. I could have gone to follow up with a doctor because I continued to have some of the same type of symptoms off and on. But by this stage, I'm going into the latent phase, and that's where the virus is there. It's no longer replicating and duplicating itself at a high degree. It's set up shop in your body, and it's just kind of there on cruise control. So you may not have as many symptoms as you did during the acute phase, which is what I experienced. So this is like 2000, in the early 2000s. I'm here in Atlanta. I've been told that I'm not positive. I've gone back to feeling, and during this period of time when I'm seriously starting to entertain the possibility that I could have, been positive. I'm not dating or seeing anybody, because I was like, you need to figure this out and know exactly what's going on. And so after getting my negative test results, I'm like, okay, everything's okay. If you want to date someone, maybe have an intimate relationship, that would be okay. That is now acceptable, because you don't have to worry about anything. I never, and again, I never knew anything about STDs, the whole STD side of this, because I never had any education or was exposed to the importance of safe sex. If a guy used and many of these guys that I did date, where there was a relationship, condoms were used. That's not to say that I was just, never said anything about a condom or never encouraged the guy. No. For many of them, condoms were used. It would just so happen to be maybe that one or two times that it wasn't, when I would infect other people. Now, I don't know exactly what or why what happened, where almost every, this is what they're saying. I don't know it to be truthful or not, but every sexual partner that I've ever had, no, except for two, and that number would be 14, were infected. And so with that, and like I said, no one's ever taken the time to explain anything to me. That's highly, highly unheard of, highly unlikely, because I've done a lot of research on HIV over the years, and then especially during the last 10 or 15 years that this has been going on. And I found out how rare it is for a woman to infect a man. It's usually the man, and there's a higher percentage of the man infecting the woman than it is for the woman to infect the man. And what that tells me is that there was something highly unusual, probably never seen before, going on with my vaginal fluids. I've never had anal sex or anything like that, so I know that that's not how it could have occurred. It's strictly vaginal fluids. It's not in my blood, because in 2002, 2003, I was an active blood donor with the Red Cross. I do recall having donated blood at least twice. And neither one of the times that I donated blood was I notified that, because HIV is automatically screened in all blood products. And so if you have HIV and you go to donate blood, and I would assume that probably a lot of people may have even found out their status this way, because a lot of people don't know that they're infected, because again, when you're infected, the virus behaves differently in every person's body. Every person's body is different and unique. So one person can become infected and become gravely ill within the first year, or another person could become infected and have no clue that they have it, and live their best life for decades and not have any clue. It's so different for each person. So, again, I donated blood, and I remember getting the little pamphlet thing saying, if you, or these are all of the different illnesses that are screened in blood products when you donate blood. And HIV, HIV-1, HIV-2 were two of the illnesses that were screened. And I was never notified that my blood products had tested positive for HIV. And again, this goes back to like 2003, 2004. Just a moment. Okay. Had to charge up my phone.